Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December edition of the Gulf of Mexico Forum webinar. My name is Kristen Larson. I'm NOAA's Gulf of Mexico Regional Coordinator with the Gulf of Mexico Regional Collaboration Team. We are part of the broader Regional Collaboration Network for NOAA, which is here to help build connections and share information between the different parts of NOAA and with partners in the region. I appreciate everybody joining today. And I also want to welcome our speakers. Before we get into things, I would like to go over a little bit of housekeeping. First off, you can join by webinar audio in two different ways. One of them is through the webinar system itself or your computer. That's super easy. If you join by phone instead, please do remember to enter your audio pin to enable audio controls. Now, audio pin, where is it? If you go to the drop-down menu for GoToWebinar on your screen, there will be a little thing that says audio. If you click on there, it will show your audio pin and you can punch that number. I think it's a 4-digit code into your phone and it will connect you fully to the webinar. So in that way, I'll be able to unmute you, for example. And if you're joining by computer audio, no worries, you don't have to worry about this. And if you don't see it, you've already entered it and you're good to go. Couple of housekeeping things. We are recording today's session, so please do not share any personal or business identifiable information, otherwise known as PII and BII. Sorry, my mouse just stopped. Hang on. All right, participants are joined to the system in mute status. That's so that we can focus better on our speakers without background noise. Except for presenters, please do leave your webcams off. Again, that is so that we can focus on the speakers. We're going to be monitoring the questions in the chat box for written questions to share during the Q&A after the presentations. We love questions, so verbal questions are also welcome during the Q&A after everybody's done speaking. To do that, please click the raise your hand icon in the GoToWebinar system. It looks like a little hand, looks about like that. If you click it, it'll raise your hand on my side so that I can unmute you. And if you click it again, it will lower your hand. So with that, I'd like to welcome our speakers today. They will be speaking about NOAA's Gulf of Mexico Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Program. Our speakers today are Brendan Turley, Carissa Gervasi, and Willem Claybor. And I am going to turn the sharing of your screen over to Brendan. Let me stop sharing real quick. And it takes me a couple clicks, apologize. All right. And Brendan, you are now the presenter.
Hello, welcome. You can hear me.
Yep.
Can you confirm you see my screen?
I see your screen. It's the editing view though.
How about now?
Yep, we're seeing your presentation now.
All right. Well, thanks for that introduction, and I appreciate the time to be able to talk to you guys today about the Gulf of Mexico Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Program. I'm going to go off my webcam just to save bandwidth, so you'll hear my voice, but you shouldn't be able to see me. So I am Brendan Turley. I'm an assistant scientist at the Cooperative Institute of Marine and Atmospheric Studies at the University of Miami. We are a cooperative institute that works closely with NOAA. Carissa and Willem are also part of that same institute. Carissa works with Southeast Fisheries Science Center with myself, and Willem's at AMOL, the Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory. Not joining us, but contributed to these slides are also Amy Freitag and Kelly Montanaro. So they're with us in spirit only. So with that, let's see, how do I actually go to the next slide? There we go. I want to just start off with some acknowledgements because the work we're going to talk about, definitely wasn't just us. There's a whole host of people behind us that helped contribute greatly to these projects. Some of the projects we're going to talk about, none of us worked on, but people graciously added some slides to kind of give us a general overview of what the Gulf of Mexico Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Program has done and does currently. And our hope is that, you know, we can reintroduce ourselves to the region, partially because Chris Kelbel was leading the group and he's since moved on to greener pastures. We miss him greatly, but he left some big shoes to fill, and I'm currently trying to fill those shoes. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to, you know, reintroduce ourselves to the region and hopefully, you know, open up some new doors, maybe, or doors that had been shut a while ago. So there's a whole host of people that are behind this, and even people that aren't named here. I keep going backwards. Oh, here we go. So I want to give a brief overview of what NOAA's Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Program is. It's a nationwide program. It's a NOAA-wide program that provides a consistent national framework, but it's also flexible to accommodate regional needs. And there's 5 main regions. We are just one of them in the Gulf of Mexico. But many people in our region also help cover the South Atlantic and US and Caribbean, which don't have their official IEA programs, but lots of the stuff that's going on in our region covers that. So generally it's an ecosystem-based approach to management, and it tries to incorporate all the components of the ecosystem, including humans, to help the decision-making process. We try and balance trade-offs and work towards some desired goal. Behind all that, the conceptual idea of what IEA is our famous wheel, where we define ecosystem-based management goals and targets. We try to develop indicators through different processes that all kind of converge to a similar sort of process of working out. Then we use those indicators to assess the ecosystem and analyze uncertainty and risk and evaluate strategies. And this all happens in various ways and products. See, I want to get my spotlight out so you can see. So the IEA approach is scalable, it's collaborative, it's adaptable, and it's flexible, and it's really designed to collaborate with many different partners, including fishery management councils, national marine sanctuaries, state management agencies, and various stakeholders, which in the fisheries world, which is what I work in, is typically the fishermen themselves. I can't advance slides when I have just the spotlight on. Interesting. Anyway, so looking more regionally, talking about our programs in particular, we try to embody all those concepts and processes that the national IEA program has laid out, and try to incorporate as much of the ecosystem as possible. And definitely focusing on the human aspect, because that's really where it matters, because we are people and humans ourselves, right? So every 3 years, we put out a 3-year plan, and our most recent one was put in, and we have 4 priority goals. One of them being informing fisheries ecosystem planning and ecosystem-based management in the Gulf of Mexico. The second one's informing marine spatial planning, which includes offshore wind. The third one is enhancing the use of IEA to inform national marine sanctuary decision-making. That's a big one. And then the last one is more focused on the human dimension, specifically trying to look at patterns of change and resilience in fishing communities, specifically in the Gulf of Mexico. So that was a really brief overview of what IEA is and what our regional program is focused on. And so the next set of slides is going to be just regional snippets of the projects, the various projects that we either have been working on or currently working on right now. So a big area of focus is working on with the marine sanctuaries, and sanctuary science support. It comes in many different ways, but the most recent focus is what's known as Sanctuary Watch, and it's a 3-year project, and it's funded through the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries via the Inflation Reduction Act, and it started in the summer of 2024. And basically what it is condition reports that try to integrate and embody the IEA process, developing indicators to assess what's going on in the various ecosystems, so these various marine sanctuaries. And they've done a lot of really good work, and I encourage you to go to this website, and they have these fantastic interactive widgets that you can click on to show various aspects of the ecosystem and the indicator that tries to establish, what has happened and what's going on in that particular aspect of the ecosystem. So it really ingests a lot of different data and has really taken a lot of subject matter experts to really refine various pieces of information to give, not only managers, but the public themselves a better idea of what's going on in the marine sanctuaries. So the Gulf of Mexico Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Team has been very integral in this. And this is primarily Kelly Montanero's work. So if you have any questions particularly about this, I highly recommend you reach out to her. And if you need her email, just you can feel free to email any of us. The next project is also headed primarily by Kelly, but I think Willem also works on this, and that's the cetacean project, and it's a compilation of environmental threats and animal data for cetacean population health analysis. And it's a collaboration between National Marine Fisheries Service, the Southeast Regional Office, the Gulf of Mexico IEA, and GCUS, which is our regional integrated ecosystem or integrated ocean observation system. Sorry. So similar to the other projects we're going to talk about, it ingests various data sources to create indicators that are useful for assessing, particular aspects of the ecosystem, in this part, cetaceans, for decision making. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Carissa.
All right, thanks, Brendan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a slightly different kind of project under our IEA umbrella. So ecosystem and socioeconomic information are really important to consider in a stock assessment context. So stock assessments are the backbone of fisheries management in the US, and they're the primary way by which we develop management advice for important fish stocks. And so I'm going to give a quick overview of a participatory modeling study that we engaged in with the Gulf of Mexico red snapper fishery. Ecosystem information is important to consider, like I mentioned, but has historically been really difficult to include in stock assessments. And that's mainly because we lack a lot of information on the mechanistic linkages between ecosystem and socioeconomic drivers and our important fish stocks and fisheries. So by harnessing the power of stakeholder local ecological knowledge, we can hope to sort of fill in some of those knowledge gaps. So by holding workshops or conversations with fishermen, we can develop these conceptual models that you see on the right here of particular fisheries of interest. So here again is the Gulf of Mexico red snapper fishery. All of the nodes or circles in the model are the important factors or variables as identified by red snapper fishermen. And all of the arrows drawn are the linkages between those factors. And once, you can go to the next slide, Brendan. Once we developed that conceptual model, our next question was, how can we use this model to inform each step of the stock assessment process? So we broke the process down into the different steps, starting with data collection, through data processing, the modeling itself, projections, and then finally communication with stakeholders and managers. And you can just click again. And so once we broke that process down, we identified the benefits of participatory modeling for each of those steps. And I won't go into too much detail, but you can kind of read brief snippets on the slide here. You can click one more time. And then once we identified that benefit, we developed a specific method for using the conceptual model and inserting that ecosystem and socioeconomic information into the particular step of the stock assessment process. And again, for the sake of time, I won't go into too much detail, but I will just highlight one example here on the very bottom right of the screen, where we can use conceptual models to identify management actions that stakeholders have identified. This could include like recreational bag limits or size limits, etc. And then we can look at all of the out arrows from those management actions and the different connections. And this can help us to identify the downstream impact of management actions according to stakeholders, and also potential unintended consequences of management actions. And this is really key because it can help managers make more informed decisions in the future, considering the potential ramifications of different management actions. And if you want more information about the specifics of this project, feel free to email me. But moving on to the next slide, Brendan. So another project I'm going to give a quick overview of is working towards automated workflows with our ecosystem status reports. So ecosystem status reports, or ESRs, are one of the primary products that we produce as an IEA, and they're also produced in the IEAs throughout the United States. So they're really important tools, and basically they compile a whole bunch of indicators about the ecosystem and socioeconomic environment that allow us to sort of keep a pulse on the ecosystem and monitor how things are changing over time. But as kind of we've been putting them together, they're a really big lift. It's a lot of information. So you can go to the next slide, Brendan. I'll just kind of briefly walk through our workflow. So the first step is to access the data. And these indicators include physical, chemical, biological, socioeconomic information. So the data come from a variety of different sources. All of that information needs to be downloaded or requested on a regular basis, and then the data needs to be cleaned and manipulated into, most often, their indicator time series, so we can kind of see how indicators have changed over time. And then we need to plot those indicators, create a report by combining text, figures, interpretations, etc., and then allow collaborators and contributors to review that report. And as you can imagine, if you're doing this sort of manually, it can be a really time-intensive project. So if collaborators are emailing data on a regular basis, it can be in different formats. If you're copying and pasting figures and text into a report and then sharing it with numerous collaborators, you have issues with version control, etc. And it's not feasible to update these on a regular basis. So next slide, Brendan. And I apologize, there's quite a few animations here, but we're trying to update this workflow and make it more automated and easily reproducible using some open science tools. So you can click once, and on the accessing the data side, where we can, we are using APIs, which allow us to automatically pull data from online data repositories, and we can write code in R to access that data and manipulate it. And then in future years, it's a lot easier to update. And then we can also store data on GitHub where we need to. GitHub is a nice central location that everyone can access, and it makes reproducibility a lot easier. Next step. So then next step is to create the indicators themselves, and we really rely on R code, Posit, or RStudio, as well as the Tidyverse package, which allows us to organize all of the data in a nice standardized format. Next. And then from there, we need to plot the indicators. And so we're working on writing functions, including Mandy Karnaskis's plot time series function, which has been really useful to plot the indicators in a nice standardized format. And making that function customizable allows us to really do whatever we need. Next slide. The next step, again, is to create the report. And we're really using this powerful tool called Quarto. If anyone hasn't heard about it before, I really highly suggest you check it out. It's sort of the next generation of our Markdown, for those who are familiar with that. And it allows you to combine text with code and figures all in one place. And you can work on it in GitHub or RStudio, Posit. And you can render your report as a PDF, as an HTML file, a Word doc, etc. It's just really very flexible. And the next step here is reviewing the report. And there are several ways that we can do this. Collaborators can go directly into the Quarto document to edit it, but you can also render the Quarto file as a Word document and upload it to Google Docs. And that's a nice way that reviewers who don't use R or coding can review the report and provide edits. Another click. And finally, we can publish this report using GitHub Pages, which allows us to create a publicly accessible web page really easily. We don't have to know anything about web development, which is great. And here's just an example here of our Caribbean ecosystem status report, which is currently in review. And just click one more time. There's the link to that ecosystem status report GitHub page if you want more information. And so hopefully in the future, we'll be able to update these ecosystem status reports on a much more regular basis. And I'll hand it back over to Brendan, or maybe to Will.
It's me again, it's Brendan. The next couple of slides, oh, thanks, Chris, I really appreciate that. The next couple of slides are gonna briefly talk about some of the work that Brittany Trost and others worked on for the Mid-Tiberia Basin ESR in Louisiana. And it was a large project trying to integrate all the information related to land loss, disturbances such as Deepwater Horizon oil spills and other oil spills and hurricanes, and restoration efforts in the southern portion of Louisiana, particularly the bayous and the Delta. And there are a host of issues affecting this region, and the team tried their best to integrate all the different sources of information to get a real understanding of what's going on in the area, all with the hopes of informing the restoration of the bayou itself, or the delta itself, by trying to divert sediment flow back into the delta to build it back up, just because of all the different disturbances and land losses going on with it. So some of the key takeaways from this is that it really tried to be a co-produced ecosystem status report, integrating as much stakeholder participation as was possible through workshops, integrating a social science team, regional experts, and public and experts' opinions. And it utilized the EBM DIPSR framework, which tries to look at drivers, pressures, state, ecosystems, and response in an integrated fashion to really understand, what's driving the changes, what pressures are involved, and how the states of the ecosystem is actually changing. And it's still in review, but it's hoped to be produced soon, and it's quite a lift. And I wanted to highlight it because it was an interesting case study for a very regional, local scale project in Louisiana. And it just really kind of embodies a lot of the principles that the IEA program tries to embody. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Will.
Thanks, Brendan, and hi everybody. My name is Will Claybor. I'm another Cooperative Institute employee at the University of Miami, and I've been leading up our Gulf of Mexico Integrated Ecosystem Assessment for wind. And so we're hoping to create and establish ecosystem indicators under this IEA umbrella for future offshore wind energy development in the Gulf of Mexico, which, unless you've been under a rock, you've noticed has been taking over, some of the marine science issues in many basins around the country. However, similar to some of the projects that Carissa was mentioning, and taking into account some of the challenges with the traditional IEA model and ecosystem status report model that she had just talked about, we took a slightly different approach with this project and are using it to test out some of those automated workflows that Carissa had gone through on the previous slide. And so using the IEA wind as our sort of thematic foundation, we're hoping to create an automated, accessible, and scalable data platform that serves both the purpose of data dashboard and ecosystem status report. We've also taken a stakeholder driven approach, similar to the red snapper conceptual model that Chris had just shared. And it's led to the selection of 23 biological, physical, chemical, and sociocultural indicators that are currently under development for this wind project. And if you could click twice for me, Brendan. Our Gulf IEA team spent much of last year seeking out and engaging with about 80 Gulf of Mexico subject matter experts and stakeholders through workshops, informal interviews, and other communications to try to better understand the diversity of perspectives and expectations about potential offshore wind impacts in the Gulf ecosystem. These communications, along with an analysis of peer-reviewed literature and comments in the Federal Register, led to the creation of a conceptual model of the issue, which, if you can click, Brendan, can be seen here. This horrendogram, our conceptual model of the issue, was vetted by the stakeholder community and used to select the 23 indicators that we're currently trying to construct. We used a modified version of the traditional IEA indicator selection process to co-produce those indicators with the stakeholders. These indicators will eventually be analyzed and served in that traditional ecosystem status report document, as well as that public-facing data portal that I mentioned. And that data portal will be updated annually as offshore wind energy projects continue to mature in the Gulf of Mexico. We're using this project as a bit of a sandbox to test out those new automation and data workflow streamlining techniques that Carissa mentioned. And so it's been a little bit slow going in the background on this, but we hope that you know, some of the pain that we're going through right now on the back end will lead to ease of automation and reproducibility for future IEA projects. And while this project is still underway, it's already led to major advancements in the Gulf IEA data ecosystem and several collaborations with outside organizations like Michigan State University, University of South Alabama, UC Santa Barbara, and the National Wildlife Federation. And I'll pass it back over to Brendan.
Thanks, Will. It's Brendan again. I'm going to take over for the rest of the presentation, and I'm going to try and present some things that other people have worked on. The next one is themed conceptual modeling. And at this point, you've probably noticed that we do a lot of conceptual modeling because I think at the core of what the IEA does is synthesize a lot of data. And that really requires talking and collaborating and thinking in these synthetic methods, which kind of comes to fruition in the conceptual modeling. So conceptual modeling, it has a long history in the IEA program, and we're still trying to figure out the best underlying structure, methods to create them, and how to report results, such as a complicated model. What you see here is a high-level model we've created for the entire Gulf of Mexico. It's our first effort at conceptually modeling. We've come a long way since, as evidenced by what Will just shared. Now we'll ask questions about what are the best ways to construct these models, at what spatial scale, and focused on what aspects of the ecosystem, and what we've created from the river diversion project, offshore wind, and are working on one for open ocean restoration. So is there value in comparing linked but separately created models? Time will tell. The next project sort of focus is human dimensions, which plays into all of our projects, but there's definitely a few projects that are hyper focused on them, and it makes all the other projects better. So human dimension factors are less likely than environmental or geochemical factors to have existing monitoring programs and indicator data sets. The Census Bureau offers the only regular monitoring of human populations, and even with that, what we want to use the data for is not necessarily why the census was designed. In addition, human values are notoriously difficult to put into quantitative terms ethically, and traditional studies of cultural ecosystems, for example, is done through an anthropological lens. Therefore, when it comes to coming up with something to include in ecosystem-wide studies or incorporate the human dimensions, we have to get creative. Scaling that data to match the ecological data while not reporting personal identifiable information is also a challenge. Here you see an example of what we came up with for an aquaculture context. Some of the usual demographic and economic suspects, but some new ones to get at the status of working waterfronts as well. The next project is focused on fishing resilience and red tides. And this is a long-running project that really was brought forward to our attention by stakeholders. So for example, in particular, during the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, fishermen came forward during public comment and said, hey, red tide is a problem, it's killing fish, which seems obvious on the face of it, but at the time was kind of a novel perspective. The IEA program took notice. Through over a decade of work, actually I think it goes back, at this point, almost 20 years, the program has tried to integrate red tide into the stock assessment process. And some of the more recent efforts took local ecological knowledge, so actually talking with fishermen about their experience with red tide and how they dealt with it and their resilience to it, has led to us a better understanding how red tide impacts the ecosystem. And on the left-hand side is just a small snippet of the kind of conceptual modeling that came out of those interviews to show how central red tide was to various aspects of the ecosystem. And on the bottom right-hand side is the output of the red grouper stock assessment, and the gray vertical bars are bad red tides that show that it has a huge impact on the fish stocks themselves, not only red grouper, but also gag grouper. Related to this project was a collaborative monitoring project that is now pretty much in hiatus. It was a collaboration between a nonprofit, the Florida Commercial Watermen's Conservation, and it was started in response to the really bad red tide in 2018. The community fundraised to buy 4 sensors, and it was a volunteer-based sampling out of Matlacha, which is near Fort Myers. And they essentially took these data sondes this fellow in the middle is holding, and we would collect data profiles or water column profiles similar to CTD cast. And we then ingested that data and provided these called like ecosystem updates. So there's like these ecosystem bulletins on the right-hand side highlighting the various parameters that were identified, but also any sort of features that might be of interest. In particular, note we were looking for like hypoxia, and you see that blue, yellow, red on the far right-hand side showing some hypoxia. It was a very interesting project, but it really kind of failed to gain a lot of traction. Although I will say there was some success because the information was used in the stock assessment process and fishery catch deliberations on the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council level. So it was successful, but it was a challenge to gain enough momentum to really keep it going. And of course, funding is always a challenge for things. Similarly, another project we have been working on closely with the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council is fishery ecosystem planning. So a big initiative by the Gulf Council is to try and include more ecosystem-based fishery management into the process. And they contracted LGL to develop a fishery ecosystem plan. And it's essentially an iterative process to operationalize ecosystem-based fishery management. And it's more designed to be a flexible guidance and not necessarily a ready-made cookbook. And this is just an example of what LGL had suggested and has then been taken by the Gulf Council to loop through different ecosystem issues. So we call it FEIs, fishery ecosystem issues. And it's a process where information is ingested and objectives and kind of timelines of work plans are developed and indicators are also developed and supposed to be worked through to come to some sort of management action and evaluation and then adjust as needed. And this is currently still being talked about in the planning stages, but some of the FEIs that have been suggested primarily by IEA personnel and people at the Southeast Fisheries Science Center. Red tide is a big one. It was selected as the kind of pilot project that's still being set up. Depredation by shark and dolphins is big too. Discards is a huge impact that have been highlighted as needing to be addressed. Climate change is everywhere, and it's the struggle with that one is to define a a specific issue or set of issues that can be addressed in the management framework. So that one's a big one. And also, and several suggestions are equity and environmental justice issues. So lots going on there, and lots to be seen what's going to happen with that. So keep your eyes out for that. Now I want to focus on the coming attractions and talk briefly about something that people may or may not have heard of, and it's NOAA's Climate, Ecosystems, and Fisheries Initiative, or CEFI. And at the surface, what it is a collaboration across NOAA line office effort to provide climate-informed advice for marine resource management and community adaptation. So what's being done is these large models, ecosystem models, are being produced on the regional scale to then be used for various purposes: habitat distribution, species forecast and projection, ecosystem-wide forecast, and looking at tipping points and thresholds. And this all will be going into stock assessments, socioeconomic assessments, ecosystem assessment, risk assessments, scenario planning, and management strategy evaluations. So this is something that's being worked on and is still kind of in its nascent planning stages. But if you want to know more, I recommend you reach out to Anna Vaz or Holden Harris in our region specifically. For our regional priority projects for the CEFI, there's a whole host of them. There's end-to-end ecosystem modeling, there's recruitment indicators for South Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. Coastal migratory pelagics are a big issue. The shrimp industry is definitely a big issue, concern. So Shrimp Futures is a good project. Resilience pathways in the Gulf of Mexico fishery communities is a big project. And the ones that I've bolded here have heavy involvement with the IEA. I mean, not to downplay the other ones, because we are somewhat involved in kind of all this at some level. The ones that are bolded are heavily involved with IEA personnel. A big one is climate enhanced ecosystem status reports, and a couple other ones, including like robust climate management strategy evaluations and episodic mortality. So this, when you think about episodic mortality and stock assessments, this is focused on red tide, but as we think about like climate change and the impacts of hurricanes or other episodic events, this will become very important to understand how this can affect and how management can adapt to these as they become more prevalent with ongoing climate change. So there's a lot going on, and I definitely recommend it that you're interested in any of these projects to reach out. We're always looking for collaborators and always looking ways to connect with the community. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and there is several links here, and we're going to send these slides out after this, so don't worry about trying to copy and paste if you're trying. These are just links to our products to give you an idea of some of the flagship things that we have worked on, and we're always looking for collaborators and data providers, subject matter experts. So if any of these projects have any of interest to you, I recommend you reach out to any of us. If one of us doesn't know, we can forward you to someone else who may have a better understanding or better point of contact. And I again will thank you for your time and attention, and we would be happy to answer any questions as best as we can at this point.
Thank you so much, Brendan and Carissa and Willem. Really appreciate presentation. With that, we have plenty of time for questions, and thank you all for coming back on camera. Again, everyone remember that we have two options available for questions today, and questions are more than welcome. First, you can enter questions by writing them into the Q&A box in your GoToWebinar menu. And if you prefer to ask verbally, you can also click the raise your hand button in the GoToWebinar interface, and I will be able to unmute you so you can speak directly to our presenters today. So with that, Let's get going. And we have a lot of good questions for all of you. So I might ask a few that are just like general questions and y'all can take turns or pass it to each other. One that I had was, I was wondering, where do you see, each of you see the highest value applications of integrated ecosystem assessments coming up for the Gulf of Mexico? So where do you see like the most value, or like, you know, in a few years, this is really going to be applicable and going to help us figure out how to better manage things?
That's a great question. I live in the fisheries world, so the fishery ecosystem planning that I talked about kind of near the end, I think there's one of the biggest, at least in that world, potentials for this framework, because we've kind of traditionally managed fish stocks and the single species kind of in a vacuum, which, you know, is not how nature works. So bringing the IEA program and what it has to offer into that realm, I think has a huge, potentially huge gains.
I can go next. You know, working under the IEA framework in an emerging and maturing technology in offshore wind has kind of given me a unique perspective, because we know there will be impacts to NOAA trust resources, but this isn't as clear-cut an application of the IEA process as, say, like a fisheries issue or some of the other use cases for IEA in the past. And so some of the things that we found useful in applying the IEA process to wind have been, one, identification of data and knowledge gaps, which have been useful in informing future research directions at the Fisheries Science Center level, and also helped us, you know, establish connections with some of those outside collaborators that I mentioned. But on top of that, I think at a higher level, the IEA framework really boils these complex, nuanced ecosystem effects down into bite-sized and communicable pieces. And so when you're trying to evaluate, you know, the quote unquote success or cost benefit of a large project like offshore wind energy development, I think having specific metrics that are understandable to you know, evaluators across disciplines is really beneficial, and I think could really help not only with decision makers in deciding how to handle future developments, but also with, you know, the layman or the interested member of the public in trying to make up their mind about how a complicated issue like offshore wind affects, you know, their perspective.
I don't want to take up too much time. I think we can move to the next question. Brendan will really capture that.
All right, thank you all. All right, this one is for Brendan. Questioner is wondering, is the Gulf of Mexico Fisheries Management Council project to write an ecosystem management FMP on your radar? And FMP is Fisheries Management Plan, I believe.
So I think I felt like I was running a marathon giving this presentation, so much to cover. So I may have kind of glossed over. So the Fishery Ecosystem Plan was contracted out to LGL. So they produced a document that the Gulf Council is currently considering for future development. So they're working on that. So we are helping as best we can, and as much as they are asking for our help. So I hope that answers your question and clarifies that has been done and is being worked on. And actually, I guess what I can say is Mandy Karnauskas, who is you know, she's the ecosystem lead at Southeast Fisheries Science Center. She's also very heavily involved in the Gulf of Mexico IEA, is the lead for the Ecosystem Technical Committee for the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council. And they're the ones that are advising the Gulf Council on these ecosystem issues. So not specifically to answer the question, but yes.
Thanks, Brendan. And just so everyone is aware, we'll be able to share your information with the speakers afterwards, and the speakers' information will be shared out with you all as well. So if you have any questions or follow-up or want to dig deeper into things with our speakers or with their colleagues that were presented on behalf of, that will definitely be an opportunity. All right. Another question for you. There's a lot of mention of automation and definitely a lot of models going on with with integrated ecosystem assessments. So do they run on a normal computer? Is it cloud computing? Is it on those big data servers like at Stennis? How do you run them? Where are they based, or does it depend, based on which project you're talking about?
Yes, I can kind of start there. So for the most part with our IEA products, a lot of our indicators are just sort of basic time series. So we might be taking like satellite data that's really large and exists on its own sort of data portal, but usually we're just sort of taking that data, subsetting it, and looking at kind of like an annual metric. So they're sort of like large snapshots of what's going on in the ecosystem over time. And so those data sets tend to be small enough that we can host them, on Google Drive or on GitHub, which is a really, easy place for us to store data. Where the more cloud computing and, large scale stuff is coming in is with the CEPI project, since those are, really big ocean models. And as part of that project, they're working on a CEPI data portal that's going to help provide better access to those really large data sets. But I think it's an issue that we are working on sort of NOAA-wide, because a lot of us deal with these really large, complex data sets and data streams. And for the most part, we don't, I think, worry about it too much as the IEA, but it's definitely something that we need to consider for certain projects. And I'll let Brennan and Will chime in if there's anything else to add. But
You did a pretty good job. I was gonna talk about CEPI. I mean, we're not running the CEPI models themselves, if that's part of what the question was asking. Like, that's being done. So CEPI itself is a cross NOAA line project, cross NOAA office line project. And OAR specifically is doing the modeling portion. And I can't really speak to their computing resources, but I know that they do have access to supercomputers to run those models. But a lot of the models are where they're run. Beyond that is also kind of project specific. So, and like Krista said, a lot of like what we do on our scales is relatively small stuff.
And they covered it. Oh, sorry. They covered it really well. One thing I'll mention though is that with this new focus on automation and trying to streamline as much as we can, we are dedicated to open science and fair and care principles. So while it might look complicated, everything that we're doing is transparent and publicly available. And so we're trying to make it as accessible and easy to download and kind of work with as possible. And so that'll hopefully both increase transparency, but also collaboration and opportunities to extend the products that we're creating.
Thank you all. Kind of building upon that last bit there, Willem. How do you circulate what you have out there? How do you get it out to other potential, collaborators, or if it's something that's a little bit more general public access? How do you publicize those? How do you connect on, like, somebody who might be interested in working with you that you don't know yet, versus how do you publicize things that are products that a fisherman might want to use, for example?
It's a great question. I can start, and I think it's something that we're still trying to work out right now as well. And for anybody that's watching this presentation that's familiar with IEAs in other regions, you'll probably have noticed that we're taking a slightly different approach to utilizing the IEA loop, and the types of products that we're putting out are not necessarily traditional IEA products. And so there aren't really there isn't a lot of precedent for things like data dashboards or dynamic conceptual models and things like that. And so we are still trying to figure out the best way to disseminate that information. But I think one thing that's been promising and has shown early returns so far is that another common theme with the projects that we've been working through is that sort of dedication to stakeholder engagement and democratization of our methods and processes. And so by baking, that engagement into the methods themselves, you're able to engage potential end users early and often. And what we've seen so far is that with our draft deliverables and some of the projects that we worked on, like wind, that generates interest naturally, and you're able to sort of snowball potential demand for the work that you're doing just by doing the work that way. And that, of course, leads to external collaboration and people, getting interested in saying, hey, I have this might be able to help you. Why don't you toss this in there? So that's a long way to say we don't really know yet, but we have some ideas about how we might go about trying to solve that issue.
I can just kind of add to that quickly. There's a lot of great open science tools that NOAA is taking advantage of, and there's a huge push at the NOAA level to engage more in open science. And so like GitHub, for example, we have on this slide here at the bottom, you can see a link to our Gulf IEA GitHub organization. It's publicly accessible. Anybody can go in there and see kind of the work that we're doing. So that's a really great tool. The link above for the Red Snapper participatory model, we created that with the program called Kumu. And if you click on that link, it'll bring you to an interactive model. You can kind of play around with the model, look at it. So that's something we can share with stakeholders and the general public, whoever's interested. So we're really excited about all of these cool tools that are coming online, data dashboards and shiny apps and things that we can use to get this information out to the public. And we always welcome more suggestions on that as well.
Excellent, thank you. All right, we have two questions here, sort of related and sort of not. So we'll kind of go in series. It's a little also related to connections and collaborations. And in some of this, you've already mentioned some of these examples, but how do you incorporate stakeholder input into the work and, kind of the human aspects, because that's, that's always, there's so much stuff in the human aspects. How does that get incorporated into something like a model? And how do you bring in stakeholder information?
Yeah, I can start and I'll pass it off to Chris and Brendan, but the participatory aspect of IEAs are built into the loop itself, and it starts at the front with sort of the identification of management issues, potential management levers that we might be able to affect, and what it is we're actually trying to derive by boiling big data down into indicators and sort of ecosystem status reports. And so the big answer and the common thread that you'll find across all projects is the most important type of engagement is that identification of the issues themselves, and then also the end users and target goals for what it is that you're trying to impact. But just going through the projects that were outlined here today, there's been a number of different ways that stakeholders have been engaged through in-person workshops, the semi-structured interviews that we conducted for wind, and even, like I said, democratization of methods in some cases, like allowing those wind participants to help us decide which indicators we want to move forward with in processing for the wind project. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. It's a little bit of a non-answer, but I don't want to dominate here, so I'll pass it over to Brendan or Chris if you guys have additional thoughts.
I was going to defer to Carissa because she's done a lot of good work on integrating participatory work.
I was just going to say, I think Will really covered it. Like we incorporate stakeholders when and wherever we can, sort of from the beginning to the end of the process. And it's really important. Not only do the stakeholders have a wealth of knowledge that is useful for helping us fill data gaps and learning more, but they also, have priorities that are relevant to management, and the managers themselves are part of our stakeholder group. And so it's important to make sure that we're doing the work that is relevant to them. So.
Thank you.
So one thing I could add is like, this wouldn't work without stakeholder engagement. Like we would not exist. So it's so integral into what we do.
Excellent. All right, and then sort of related question. It was really interesting to see the example of citizen science with the fishermen and red tide. The question is wondering if there are other examples where public science or citizen science has been incorporated into your projects.
So the collaborative monitoring, you know, is one example. Um, are there other examples? I'm actually not certain about that one.
Yeah, not off the top of my head, and definitely not at, I would say it's more important to that project than anywhere else. I think there might be indicators and metrics that are populated by citizen science initiatives that are used in projects, but in terms of actually, you know, baking the citizen science into like the actual methods and the fundamentals of a project, I think that's the only example that I can think of.
Yeah, I
That
guess
makes
just kind
sense,
of rolling
especially
off.
since it was kind of brought up through the fishermen as well, too.
Yeah, I mean, Will brings up a good point. It's not, I don't want it to be lost that a lot of the data that are ingested come from various sources and may have been collected by stakeholders, citizen science. And all that is like well documented. So they're really hard to run, really expensive and time consuming, and they're very rewarding, but we're also very funding limited. So if we had tons of money, I think we would do more.
All right, another question, and we have a couple minutes left. So you mentioned a project where the IEA team was contributing to coastal management and restoration planning in Louisiana. Do you see opportunities for the IEA work to inform habitat restoration projects funded by NOAA?
I'd say yes. The exact pathway to do that is not clear to me at the moment because it wasn't one of the projects I worked on anyway. So I'll defer to anyone else on this.
I mean, broadly speaking, I feel as though the IEA approach has been underutilized by NOAA in the past, and I think there are broader applications like habitat restoration that are unexplored. But to put it bluntly, I feel like any sort of you know, project that interfaces with natural resources that could benefit from distillation and simplification of indicators or tracking benchmarks, I think could benefit from the IEA process. And like I said, we've seen early returns on you know, benefits from that dedicated stakeholder engagement as well, which, you know, with habitat restoration and things that are maybe not front of mind for stakeholders per se, but are charismatic in a way that people care about. I think this is an interesting sort of front porch to issues like that allows people to interface with those types of actions. So I would say yes.
Great points. And we had another participant mention in the chat, it creates a great baseline to determine restoration success as well. So good stuff. All right. One last kind of wrap-up question. I see we're coming up on the hour. Questioner is curious, what developments do you most look forward to that will advance how integrated ecosystem assessments are done in the near future?
The one that I think is most promising for our region specifically is just the automation, because like producing the ESRs and the various products can be quite time consuming. And if we could relieve a lot of that burden to just producing things quickly, and that way we can focus on the science and not the production of a report, that would greatly free up resources.
Ditto. You know, we all have other jobs and things that we're working on as well. And so if we can reduce sort of the processing burden with actually producing some of these reports and you know, ease the that sort of analysis step, we're going to be able to produce a lot more and you know, have a broader impact. So like I mentioned during the win slide, it's slow going right now, and it's kind of painful to be in GitHub and trying to, you know, break out of workflows. But once it's done, I think it's gonna be a huge leap forward for the group.
I'll just kind of add in quickly. I think the CEPI project is going to be really valuable as well too when we get those large scale ocean models, and along with those is going to come some like projections of what might happen in the future. And so when we're thinking about climate change and other changes that might occur in our region, it's really going to be helpful from a management context to help, I think, our managers to think a little more long-term and try to plan for some of those future possibilities that are so uncertain right now.
Thank you. And I see we're at our hour. Brendan, Chris, and Willem, thank you again so much for presenting today. It was really a fascinating loop through so many different topics. It was really great. Thank you. And I also want to thank all of our participants. We will be sharing out information and our presenters' contact information with the participants afterwards. So be on the lookout for that. And also just wanted to note that our next webinar in the series will be in February. I can't believe we're in December already and I'm talking about February, but here we are. February 2025 will be our next webinar. I will be working on topics for our upcoming year of seminars. So if you have a good idea, please send it my way at kristen.r.larson@noaa.gov. LAURSEN is how my last name is spelled. And please also be on the lookout. I'm going to be sending out a quick question to people on my email list to check if you want to be on the calendar event for these webinars, and just so that I make sure I'm not, spamming people's calendars. So be on the lookout for that as well. Once again, thank you so much to our presenters today, and thank you for everyone participating. I hope you have a great December and a chance to relax over the holiday season. Take care. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.